With Arch Tempered Arkveld out, we've officially gotten the last title update for the base game of Monster Hunter Wilds. It's been quite a while since my ranking of that game, and given how long we'll have to wait until the expansion, I decided to do a mini ranking of all the title update monsters, from the worst to the best. Mizutsune, Gogmazios, Omega Planetes, Lagiacris, they're all here to be ranked in a much shorter video than usual. I would say I'm really happy with what we got from these free updates, and have continued Wild's track record of not having a single bad monster in my opinion. I have quite a lot to say about these guys, especially given how divisive the community has been regarding some, like Mizutsune and especially Omega. This video will be structured a little differently than my usual ranking. Even though I will be using the same structure and criteria sheet as before, I will actively be showing a tier list this time around. I'll give my thoughts on a monster, then show where I'd place it in comparison to the base game roster. For that reason, I highly encourage anyone who hasn't to watch my original ranking before coming back to this one. And that's really about it, so let's keep this intro brief for once and dive right in. Now before I get into the actual ranking itself, I wanted to reassess my opinions in my original ranking, seeing if I still agree with all my choices and changing where some monsters are placed. It may not seem that long, but in just short of a year, my opinions on some monsters have changed quite a bit. If you'd prefer to just skip this part, I'll have the timestamp right here. We'll go from bottom to top. The first monster I'm changing is Blanganga, who I'm bumping into the good tier. Blanganga was originally a monster I had nothing to say about, but I've grown more appreciative over time and can now confidently say I like him, especially after the 9-star version, who feels like the proper upgrade that this monkey needed, making him a legitimate threat with his combos and flying fists. I used to say that Congalala was easily better than him, but now I think they balance out with Blanganga having the better fight but less ecology, while Congalala has the better ecology but lacking fight. Our next monster we're bumping up is Hirobami, who will be much higher in the good tier. The high-star versions of this hunt, and especially the pack investigations, have really confirmed this floating fishy as the best pack monster in my eyes. While I still think the fight could be more complex and less simple on its own, and the ecology is still kinda iffy, the amount of fun I have with him more than makes up for it. Then on to Guardian Dosha, who I'm dropping down to average. Despite some fair criticisms of my Guardians video, my opinion on the Guardians have only worsened over time. Plus, base Dosha is very much carried by his presence in the story, which Guardian lacks, along with some of the other qualities I found in normal Dosha Guma. This is why I don't consider them equal in quality, as there's never any time where I prioritize fighting Guardian over the base species. Speaking of which, Guardian Fulgur is also dropping down to the top of average. G-Fulgur's issues only get more apparent the more I hunt it, and it feels hypocritical to give Fulgur a higher score than Ebony given they suffer from the same issues. Also, given how much better Guardian Rathalos is compared to the others, it feels right putting him in a higher tier than the other three. That marks all of the monsters where my thoughts on them have changed, so let's end this section off with my opinion on the Arch Tempereds. Starting with AT Raidao, I definitely think this is the weakest Arch Tempered. I do like the new Fulgurite gimmick, where the blue crystals now leave thunder after effects until you break it off. However, he also gains this new Get Off Me move, which seems like a great addition, but has a pretty bad hitbox and is spammed to the point of being annoying. This prevents me from putting him in the peak tier, but I still think Raidao stays where he is in the tier list. Definitely the Arch Tempered I have the least to say about. Next up is AT Uthduna, who deserves credit for the most improved of the Arch Tempereds. My biggest complaint was that she lacked a physical moveset, and she now is given some lunges and swipes that prevent her from just being the belly flop queen. That makes her fight way more varied here, and the new vibrant coloration and shine really makes her pop, even in the rain or fallow. However, what prevents me from saying her fight is great is that the hitboxes on some new and old attacks are pretty bad, making it frustrating to get close when you're constantly getting clipped. It's still a step in the right direction for this monster and her mechanics. As for AT New Udra, I really enjoy this fight. He has a few moves integrated from Shei Wu, which is interesting, and I love the new Tar Explosion. It's definitely the big Nova attack that he needed. The purple fire is also a gorgeous visual, making him one of the best visual upgrades I'd seen on an AT. Like Uthduna, the only thing I could critique is that the hitboxes are clunky in areas, clearly having not been polished out. He also has this new heat aura that can force you to back off at times, but it's not nearly as tedious as it was for, say, Lunastra in World. This was the one I was most curious about, because Jin is my hot take monster and somewhat overrated. Sadly, I don't find AT Jin to be much of an improvement here. They did add some combo extensions that actually make the fight feel kinda urgent, but he now has this tiresome habit of spamming this charge attack over and over to the point he resembles a massive Tigrex. I also find breaking all the parts to be even easier than it was for Tempered Jin, making it trivial to prevent the Nova and beat him to a pulp. That said, he does have two new attacks, a 270-degree tailspin that works fine as a keep-away tool, and this sideways beam that always feels good to dodge through. I was definitely interested to see how Jin Dahad would be improved with the Arch Tempered, so it's safe to say that I'm disappointed that more wasn't done here. Lastly, we have AT Arkveld. Compared to Nergigante and Velkhana, I think Arkveld got the biggest upgrade of the flagships. You know how AT Nergi and Velk only had like 1 or 2 new attacks each? Well, Arkveld has like 5 or 6. Dragon lines that erupt from the ground, these wild chain swings that require even more directional dodging, combo extensions that always manage to keep the pulse pounding, and a whole new Guardian phase. After absorbing enough Wilk energy, he's able to harness the latent Guardian powers and use Wilk attacks alongside the Dragon attacks. It's the closest thing we get to fighting G Arkveld again. Hell, he can even form Wilk crystals on the ground that can be used with or against him. I appreciate that the Guardian powers are something he gains temporarily after absorbing the cocoons, which eventually runs out and he can't use them until absorbing another cocoon, something I'll touch on with a certain title update monster. This fight is far from perfect though. Because of the new explosions and Wilk crystals, there can often be so much visual clutter that you can't even tell what the hell's going on. Those tail attacks still suck, and I don't know who decided that the Guardian monsters should interrupt the fight every single minute just to be a nuisance. The music also slaps, but that doesn't need to be said by me. This is easily a standout amongst the Arch Tempereds, and my opinion on Arkveld has overall improved over time, not just with the AT. You can see why I didn't make a separate video on the Arch Tempereds because I don't have a ton to say. I think most improve on the originals, but never wildly change my opinion. So let's get into my ranking of all the title update monsters. Again, no hard feelings on if a monster you like is lower on the list. This is a very stacked lineup, and all of these monsters have their dedicated fans. In fact, most would have cracked my top 10 in the original Wilds ranking. If you disagree with where I placed them or would have ranked them differently, let me know in the comments because I'm genuinely curious, especially given how divided people have been on some. Anyways, let's kick off this ranking with a placement that'll surprise absolutely no one. Out of everyone I'll be talking about today, it's tough to pick a weirder title update monster than Rathian. As the secondary mascot of the franchise, it's strange to get this girl as a title update, especially given that her sexually dimorphic partner showed up in Wilds just fine. I understand why she's here because Rathalos feels lacking without Rathian beside him, but I do wonder why she's a title update. She doesn't have any new moves, which is a bit disappointing, but what they did do is improve her mechanically. When I often say I want more from a boss, a lot of people will just assume more attacks and nothing else. But sometimes, technical changes in how a boss utilizes its moves can be just as impactful as adding new attacks. Rathian now has a lot more combo extensions, such as threading her tail flips together and transitioning her fitness gram pacer into her fireball. She can also reposition herself both in the air and on the ground to better hit you with tail flips and fireballs. They also incorporated some attacks from Pink and Gold Wrath into her moveset, mainly the charged up fireballs and her diagonal tail flips. Not in a way that removes the special aspects about her subspecies, but rather builds on Rathian and makes her feel better in this game. I do like these additions and think that makes her the best version of base Wrath that I've personally fought, but I can't help but feel let down. Despite how divisive some of the other monsters became, I feel that Rathian was lacking as a title update in comparison. Overall, despite being a step in the right direction for Rathian, I can't help but feel my opinion on her hasn't improved enough to say that this was worthy of being a title update monster. And to put it bluntly, she's just not a cool or interesting creature to hunt or see appear on the map. She's not bad at all and far from my least favorite monster in Wilds, but it wouldn't sit right with me to put her above any of the other title updates. Bro, it's gonna be the funniest thing when I see people in the comments take this seriously or think I've officially lost it. Obviously, Rathian isn't a title update monster. I just didn't include her in the last ranking and thought this would be funny.
Word of advice, Don't drop the soap.
Why?
Let's get into a discussion that's been long overdue since the release of my base wilds ranking. It's time for the bubble weasel himself, Mizutsune. Mizu was the very first title update, and was definitely a source of controversy to say the least. Title updates are usually restricted to monumentous monsters that have an undeniable impact, challenging old and new hunters alike, completely altering the endgame and leaving players hungry for more to come. Compared to some classics like a Cantor or Gammoth that have been condemned since the 4th generation, Mizutsune got to make an appearance just last game with Monster Hunter Rise. Actually make that 2, 3, I'm starting to see the problem. We already fought 3 versions of this guy not even 3 years before this game came out, and one of those was a title update as well. Mizu may be a flagship, but is definitely lacking in the impact and crave usually seen in title update monsters, like Deviljho for World or Rajang for Iceborne. However, I will give credit where it's due. Mizutsune is still a solid monster, and it's good to see him turned into an endgame encounter. As for the campaign, it's simple enough. You meet up with Best Girl Kanya, who tells you to go kill this bubble weasel making a mess in the forest. Eventually you find Mizu, and I think the cutscene does a great job with establishing his personality, playing a game of Pop Goes the Weasel with Doshiguma. In fact, all of Mizu's turf wars are great, I'll give him that.
We got a rule around here about blowing bubbles.
All bubble-blowing babies will be beaten senseless by...
I'd say Mizu's fight is pretty enjoyable, if flawed in some areas. The AI is programmed in a way where Mizu prefers to box you in with his bubbles and uses physical attacks to strike you down. Mizu works really well in focus mode, and I find dodging through his thin water beams and tail slams to be especially invigorating. I really like his Bubble Blight, an entirely unique status in the same vein Blast Scourge was to Bracky and Iceborne. Getting hit by the bubbles gives you a little mobility boost at first, and then quickly turns you into a slippery mess that can't dodge for nothing. It's a fun mechanic that unfortunately doesn't get used enough here, but I'll get into that later. There are some especially dangerous moves to look out for, like his Shotgun Soaker at close range, which he mostly uses when he enters... oh boy. Let's get the Soul Seer controversy out of the way. For those who don't know, Deviants were a class of monster variations that originated back in GU. One of these was Soul Seer Mizutsune, a blind deviant that used blazing bubbles to both set you on fire and sense his surroundings. The reason I'm going into this is because base Mizu will enter a powered up state either by his head being broken twice or being dealt enough damage. This will trigger a blue eye and allow Mizu to fire blazing bubbles the same way Soul Seer did. Many of these deviants are beloved by older fans, so it's angered a lot of said fans that they're possibly invalidating Soul Seer and other deviants from returning. I personally can't speak on the matter because I've never fought Soul Seer or played the old games, but I felt it needed to be brought up, and I'll simply be sharing my thoughts on these mechanics as a new gen fan. Regarding the ecology, I don't mind them drawing a line between the base monster and its deviant. I more so don't like how just doing enough damage or a head break is enough to awaken the powers within, and now we can suddenly use fire bubbles. I would have preferred if eating gunpowder fish was what triggered the use of fire bubbles, and it was a temporary thing he had to consume to charge up, like Puke Puke with scatternuts. That's definitely more of a nitpick though. My biggest issue is how it affects the gameplay. I think that the Soul Seer aspects make this Mizu feel like a smorgasbord of different mechanics that don't really feel cohesive. Say what you will about Rise having 3 different Mizus, but Violet and Base each had their own distinct ailments and mechanics that were given their time to shine. On the other hand, Wild's Mizu has the Soul Seer mode, Water Blight, Bubble Blight, and the Fire Bubbles. I tend to appreciate more complexity on a boss, but when there's so many mechanics to juggle, some like the Bubble Blight feel non-existent in the battle. I feel like they could have just had Tempered Mizu exclusively use the Fire Bubbles from time to time, letting normal Mizu perfect those water and bubble mechanics without feeling smushed under the Soul Seer stuff. He also has a problem with how inconsistent his aggression can be. There are some fights where Mizu will just kinda sit there like a punching bag, and other times he's an absolute menace with no openings. Of course, enraged and exhaust phases exist, but this battle feels too topsy-turvy for its own good, making it sort of a dice roll whether you get an engaging hunt or not. Then onto the visuals, and I gotta say, the graphics on the bubbles is worth Mizu's jump into 6th gen alone. I'm sure it caused climate change in every PC, but the way the bubbles contort and float across the air is absolutely breathtaking. Mizutsune's design looks amazing here too. The concept of a blossom fox weasel that slicks across the water and uses bubbles as a weapon is such a silly but awesome idea. A neat lore tidbit is that all of the Mizus you fight are male, the females are entirely passive. The pink, purple, and white color scheme that's clearly inspired by cherry blossoms looks great in the Scarlet Forest, and he feels like he was made for this environment due to his ecology. Seeing him swim across the deep rivers like an otter, or actively hunt after fish by the shoreline adds so much to his character. Even more so when you see his cute little fox hops or when he blows these giant bubbles just for the fun of it. One last thing I should mention is the Wild's rendition of Mizu's theme, and I think it's fine. Like, yes, it's nowhere near the god tier quality of his GU and Rise theme, but I definitely think people exaggerate when they call this theme a full-on bastardization. There's a lot to break down about Wild's Mizu, but overall, he's a monster with a lot of outstanding qualities like everything visually, but gets brought down by biting off more than it could chew with its mechanics. I still think he's a great boss, so if this is the quote-unquote weakest title update monster, I think we got some pretty supreme choices coming up soon.
Knock, knock, motherfucker, it's the United States of America, and I hear you guys got oil that isn't under my possession.
Gog help us all. Gogmazios is truly sensational for your first Elder Dragon, and I can't think of a better monster to teach new fans what these dragons are capable of. I like the fact that despite establishing this beast as a true envoy of natural disaster, he's still as much of a living, breathing animal as the ordinary monsters. The first time you see him, he isn't destroying a castle or eating children, he's just sleeping peacefully, with the hunters not realizing that the giant kaiju they're searching for is right behind them, only to disappear in a flash. The setup is awesome. I know some people don't like the support hunters joining your siege no matter what, since it's been a tale as old as time to only have 4 hunters. But for Gog and Gog alone, I'm okay with them shaking things up here. Fabius returning to be a reliable tank, Best Boy Kai providing heals, Nadia knocking out Gog with her artillery, they all help out in a way that the hunters from World could never do. No monster in this game comes close to conveying the enormity that Gogmazios does here. You can feel his immense scale. You can feel the thousands of tons made up of muscle and oil. As for the design, what needs to be said by me? It's just plain phenomenal. His massive head that resembles a warship, the variety of siege artillery and weapons stuck to his body from past battles, he is truly deserving of the nickname Spectre of War. Now let's talk about the first phase of the fight, easily my favorite part. He has the same skeleton as Gore Magala, which I didn't know until fighting him, but feels entirely distinct due to his colossal size and sluggish speed. Attacks that I had long gotten used to with Gore, like the double wing slam, are now made terrifying under Gog's massive hitboxes. That's on top of the firepower he has, or rather oil power from his beam attacks that can snipe you from any distance. All of this is consistently fun and interesting. It's tough but fair, and never feels tedious because it serves as the moveset you learn throughout the bulk of this hunt. What I appreciate about this boss and one later on the list is how much they reward using the Sacrets, both to avoid the tar and to simply run around given his size. Another aspect found in Gog is the DPS checks that encourage the use of multiple weapons. The novelty of having 2 weapons out on the hunt sadly wore thin due to how superficial it actually was, but with this fight, it becomes something you'll need in order to manage the DPS. He alternates between an oiled up phase and a soft and squishy phase, where the oil phase requires fire damage to heat him up, while the squishy phase requires dragon element to suppress his elemental power. Then in phase 2, Gog finally lets out his lava laser, an awesome yet terrifying attack that sets the entire floor ablaze, forcing you to migrate to higher ground, and having to tackle him in a much more claustrophobic scenario. This phase is literally just the better version of the Old Iron King from Dark Souls 2. Shout out to anyone else who fell into that pothole full of Fanta. This part is a lot easier than the first, mostly because of how slow and predictable the attacks are, as well as how many NPCs are packed into one spot. His back has this massive futuristic gun wedged in it, so the focus is to break his back so the cannon falls to the ground, letting us use it against him. It's a super satisfying moment when you set Gog ablaze with a blast that would literally kill Solo Fatalis, oh my lord. That leads into an incredible reveal once the third and final phase kicks in. Despite the size of this colossus, Gogmazios has wings, and begins flying through the air as you climb up the mountain in hot pursuit. I was speechless during this reveal. It felt like it came straight out of the final battle of How to Train Your Dragon, with this hellish kaiju-sized beast chasing you in the air as you ascend higher and higher up. Granted, you aren't actually in much danger during this chase, but the spectacle more than makes up for it. Furthering my point about Gog's insane weight, you can feel the struggle it takes for this brute to keep himself in the air. It makes him unique compared to any other winged monster. My favorite example of this has to be when he lowers his head to fire his lava laser, and you can see his little arms pawing at the ground, desperately trying to stay up in the air. When he's had enough, Gogmazios will heat a scalding red as he begins to rain literal hell on your team, requiring you hide behind Fabius for cover, or with your own weapon if you can block. The fire and dragon phases that were a core mechanic thus far are now essential here. For this part, dragon damage is a mandatory DPS that must be met. If you don't deal enough dragon damage before the nuke, it becomes an insta-kill like Eschaton. You do get one get out of jail free card with the ledge you can climb up on, but that's about it. Because of his constant flying, you have to use these wyvern pods off his back to blast at him and meet the DPS check. This phase is constantly frantic and panicked, with piles of tar that hinder your movement or explode in fiery bursts, lava lasers that have a scary amount of range, and huge spanning attacks that are mostly carried over from phase 1. Quick, you better kill Gog fast. Can't you hear the music? That's proof of a hero from an older game. Every hunter knows it means choking at the last minute. Reel it in before it's too late. But if you exceed those DPS checks, then the Spectre of War is slain, and the sun shines brightly on a noble team of heroes. So when it comes to presentation, this is truly one of the greatest in the entire series, and you may wonder why he's not higher on the list. There's unfortunately some issues I have with Gog, mainly having to do with the last phase. The second phase is great, but suffers from being somewhat clunky and nowhere near as engaging as the first. Because of the cramped space, Gog's attacks don't allow for the same movement strategies that phase 1 or 3 demand, mostly boiling down to backing away from his swipes, then coming back to attack, backing away from his laser, then coming back to attack, etc, etc. I do like that you can jump off the platform at any time. It makes for a good escape route when you're in a pickle or need to switch weapons. Because of that, I wouldn't call this phase unfair in the slightest, just somewhat repetitive and clunky. What I do appreciate is the team coordination it demands, since some hunters need to grab his attention while others need to prep the cannon and aim it properly at Gog. The third phase is where my biggest gripes lie, and certainly has divided people on whether it's thrilling or frustrating. As mentioned before, Gog flies for a majority of this phase and mostly relies on you firing wyvern pods from a distance. You can try to attack him with your weapon during this, but the fight constantly punishes you for that and clearly wants you to use the slinger pods to flinch him, where you can attack his wings and get a knockdown. I get that they wanted to make the fight unique by utilizing the dragon pods, but it really takes away from the spectacle of this colossal dragon hunt when you spend half of this phase running around in circles and firing laser balls from afar. There are clear opportunities to knock him down and stuff like the boulders exist, but I don't think this phase needed to be so gimmicky. I also find the amount of oil explosions on the ground excessive to the point of being irritating, especially if you're trying to run to Fabius and all of a sudden you get blown away by a fruit gusher that comes out of nowhere. That is just complete bullshit. It is a shame I have these problems because there are clear signs of the developers learning from past bosses. Gogmazios turns scalding hot and his hit zones are made incredibly vulnerable to dragon, giving you one last chance to deal elemental damage. It's a great improvement over Elatrion's big attack, where you just abandon quest once you realize you failed the DPS. I can also see that they tried to learn from Xeno'jiiva's flying phase, where you had to knock him down with your slinger ammo, which has now been transferred into Gog's flying phase. On a last note, the armor and weapon designs are truly spectacular, but I am definitely not happy with the new Ardian system. I won't go too much into Gog's gambling slots and casino, but the lottery system they made here can be pretty damn tedious given how much RNG there is. Not to mention how much they break your Zenny bank. It really does feel like a casino.
You lose!
Need some change?
No,
Why?
because I'm all out of money!
This monster totally could have been in the peak tier, and it has plenty of awesome elements that definitely deserve credit, but a lot of that is bogged down by some clunky aspects that falter in execution. The first phase is awesome, the second phase is great despite some issues, the third phase is kind of a mixed bag when putting aside the spectacle. It's a fight I sadly find to get worse as it goes along, but I totally see room for improvement, and maybe we'll get that in the mastering version, like we saw for Kulf Taroth. I'm glad I got to finally hunt one of my most anticipated monsters. And while I can say base game Wilds ended with a bang, I wish that bang had a little bit more substance.
I'm
Don't
Steve.
dare finish that sentence. Don't do it.
When it comes to rock-solid monsters that always remain a thrill to hunt, I can't think of a better example to list than Seregios. The flagship of Monster Hunter 4U, the introduction of the bleed status, the owner of a skeleton exclusive to him until Arkveld came out, Seregios has a lot of impact for how little people talk about him. It's honestly criminal how much this monster has been universally shafted by the fanbase, with people forgetting to even talk about him despite being a title update. I'm looking at you, Hunter Awards. Most fans I've talked to are pretty lukewarm on him. Even if there are flagships that receive way more hate like Magna Malo, at least they're talked about. I rarely find anyone passionate towards Seregios in a positive or negative way. The biggest praise I can give Seregios is how much he stands out compared to the typical flying wyvern like Rathalos. Instead of being based on a generic wyvern, he's inspired by birds of prey, primarily the red-tailed hawk. He stomps on you like a secretary bird, he swoops and snatches you from the ground like an owl, he attacks with zygodactyl claws akin to parrots, he soars with the grace of a hawk and kills with the precision of a falcon. No other flying wyverns move like he does, making every other flyer in this game look clunky in comparison. His design reflects this too, sleek, jagged, sharpened to a point, and designed to kill with scary amounts of efficiency. I love his gold and red color scheme that blends into the plains, the pinecone resemblance with the rattling of scales, and how his scales are flung like throwing knives at you. However, I will admit that I wish they focused more on the avian and less on the draconic when it came to his design. Imagine if Seregios was a giant golden eagle, a bird wyvern that flung its sharp golden feathers at you instead of scales. That would be so damn sick. As mentioned earlier, Steve is rock solid all around, and the battle is no exception. It mostly boils down to swooping and swiping his claws at you, which may be repetitive, but is so damn fun that I personally don't mind. What helps is that he's brilliantly designed to the benefit of focus mode, allowing you to constantly keep up with his movements and face him on a dime. Steve has an awesome grab attack as well. The way he claws at you easily makes this one of my favorites alongside New Udra. Seregios is insanely aggressive, having all of these combo strings that weave his swoops together, and learning to dodge one after the other is new levels of exhilarating. The scales that rattle off him deal bleed damage, and this is great, because trying to crouch or eat jerky with Mighty Eagle on your ass is never an easy feat. He can pick up small monsters and chuck them at you too. Not in a seldom way like Doshiguma, he'll just pick up Saradnov after Saradnov until he finally gets a strike.
Nice throw.
This might be the most fun boss to offset as well. There's something about perfectly guarding or parrying his constant sweeps that never gets old to me. If I had to say how to improve him, I would definitely give him a few more tail or bite attacks. I know he's a bird of prey and logically prioritizes his claws, but a bit of moveset variety would help make the swoops feel less redundant. I really enjoy his intro cutscene, where he pops in just to yoink a kid's sacred for himself, and we have to get it back before we start seeing lost pet posters all over Kunafa. Also, the idea of Seregios actively hunting down sacred as a source of prey, brilliant. If anything, I wish they used that more. Having a monster that attempts to eat your animal companion, they could have had the Sacred literally knock you off and run away in fear whenever Steve is around, removing them as support anytime you hunt Seregios. The idea is there, but not all the way. In fact, I hope we get a new monster that fully hones in on this concept, because I really like it. One of my favorite lore tidbits is the rivalry he has with the Wrath duo, constantly getting into squabbles with Rathalos and actively hunting down Rathian.
Ugly little girl, I hate you!
This is definitely the title update I have the least to say about, because Steve doesn't have any major flaws that bring him down. He may not have the highs that Gog or Omega have, but he doesn't have the lows they share either. I certainly find Seregios to be an underrated flagship, shining bright on his own and even usurping some poster boys like Rathalos or Tigrex.
We tired of playing with your ass. Say goodnight, motherfucker.
I know some people are going to be super mad that I put Steve above Gog, but if that'll finally get people to acknowledge Steve is in this game, then so be it. I just can't believe that Capcom hasn't made a variation of this guy. Like, this is the only flagship to not have a subspecies, variant, or anything. What are we missing with our 40th paint job of Rathian when we got Steve over here being left to rot?
Squidward! The robots are running the Navy!
Not the Navy!
Now for the most controversial one, the Final Fantasy crossover itself, the slayer of new and old players alike, Omega Planetes. As I said when discussing Behemoth back in my world ranking, I've never played a Final Fantasy game, so I can't judge Omega on how good it represents the game or how well of an adaptation it is. But I can judge him as a monster. This was easily the hardest monster to rank. I've seen many call him the best monster in Wilds, and equally as many call him the worst. As for what I think, I find Omega to be leagues better than Behemoth or the Leshens. That may not be saying much, but this clanker is definitely one of the most thrilling fights that Wilds has to offer, and deserves to be praised alongside the other top tier monsters. Before I get into the design and controversy around a robot being in Monster Hunter, I want to reel back some past things that I have said, mainly having to do with my good old friend Leshen. In the past, I claimed that the Leshens were inherently bad in both design and concept, saying it was ridiculous for a humanoid to be a monster hunter. However, that's kind of the whole point. A woodland spirit with magical powers that is completely alien and contradictory to the world we know? That works in contrasting the Witcher universe to this one. Leshen and Ancient Leshen are still god-awful, make no mistake. But a creature this out of left field isn't inherently bad for a crossover. It was just the execution that made them so heinous. The reason I make this point is because Omega works incredibly well as a crossover for the same reason. A robot may be contradictory to Monster Hunter, but once again, that's the point. It's a god-killing clanker that travels across different dimensions, seeking out the strongest beings to kill for its own power. Of course it's not gonna fit into this universe. I just love this thing's design and concept. Maybe because it reminds me of the Omni Droid from The Incredibles? I guess I'm just a sucker for four-legged robots with visor eyes that are highly intelligent. Omega also conveys a ton of personality, with it considering you a beta lifeform that's not even worth speaking to. It does a lot to show how arrogant its AI has become. The battle does a fantastic job at translating a raid boss into Monster Hunter. You need 4 players that are assigned essential roles: a tank that keeps Emity to hold its attention, a healer to keep everyone alive, and 2 DPS players to maintain damage and break parts. It's also nice how they actually scale Omega to single player. That, along with the inclusion of support hunters, makes Wilds way more friendly towards solo players or people who play offline. This Robo-Wrecker is an absolute killing machine. Back missiles, face lasers, flamethrowers, rocket jets, Omega Planetes has it all. Even mustard bombs that leave lingering flames, flying fists of Arcus that punch you into oblivion, electric balls that sap your maximum health, even these armies of Omega Micros that explode in your face. It all seems incredibly overwhelming, but what makes it work is that every attack is telegraphed in a way that's fair and easy to learn. Destroying Omega's wounds or the Micros grant you shields that can be used to block his firepower. The mustard bomb can be diverted away from the battle to reduce chaos. The missiles can be dodged with proper timing. It's all surprisingly polished when considering how janky the crossovers were in World. That's something I can say in Omega's favor. You can tell the developers learned learn from their mistakes. With Behemoth, the tank needed to maintain Emedy in order to avoid Charybdis, which was this irritating gimmick spammed to an obnoxious degree, especially when it came to Extremith. Meanwhile, if Emedy isn't maintained on Omega, he is a mustard bomb to target anyone, which is essentially a far less annoying version of Charybdis. He can also fire multiple waves of MRV missiles that'll target everyone at once unless Emedy is met. Fighting Omega without Emedy makes the fight significantly harder instead of significantly more obnoxious. Then there's his Pantocrator mode, where he throws a massive temper tantrum and basically requires backing away to avoid getting trampled, on top of having a massive increase in damage and aggression. What's cool is that this enraged phase also opens up wounds on the legs, and dealing enough wounds can knock him out of this mode. Something I also appreciate is the text that appears whenever Omega prepares a big attack, because the only attacks given text are the ones where sheathing your weapon or moving quickly are a necessity. The MRV missiles and mustard bombs as mentioned, but also the starboard and larboard cannon, with the text itself letting you know which direction the cannon will fire. The only other text being for a certain delta cannon, which brings us into the good old-fashioned DPS check. Basically, Omega summons a holographic Nursilla, who you have to fight while Planetes charges up its cannon to blast you to Kingdom Come. Either you kill the holographic Meatloaf before he finishes charging up the cannon, which grants you a shield to survive the laser, or fail to kill the spider and pray to the god of your choice. One thing this fight teaches you is to make use of your second weapon in Sacreds. Like Gog, Omega makes this DPS pivotal to winning this hunt, but to an even greater degree. Omega is immune to fire but weak to thunder, while Clone Nursilla is weak to fire but resistant to thunder. So having a fire weapon on the fly makes the DPS check far more easy to manage. This part is definitely my biggest gripe with Omega and holds him back from being higher on the list. It's not because the DPS is inherently bad or unreasonable, I mainly don't like fighting the Clone Nursilla, who has these new blue laser attacks that are stupidly high in damage and range, with some pretty questionable hitboxes. I can respect that it's unique compared to the hide behind a rock method we've seen way too much at this point, but holographic spider is definitely not my cup of tea. But then after that, the shield saved you just in time as Omega finally admits that it underestimated you as a threat. And the new track comes in. Lyrical music isn't entirely new to Monster Hunter. The OST for Rise's Wind Serpents are practically an anime opening track, but hearing this banger never gets old to me. In fact, the OST is all around amazing, both the lyrical track as well as the instrumentals for Bass and Savage Omega. This leads into the final phase, where everything turns into absolute insanity, but still in a way that doesn't feel janky or unfair. I would say that there are no individual attacks that are complete bullshit, except for that charge. There is a noticeable tell for it, but I still find it cheap how stupidly fast that attack is. I definitely think a lot of people exaggerate when they call Omega a janky mess. I refought Behemoth to compare, and there is a huge difference in polish. More than any other boss I've hunted in these games, Omega is a foe you need to learn. You have to plan your build in the most efficient way, and ultimately strategize how to make use of the tools provided. This fight truly feels like a brilliant blend between the mechanics of Final Fantasy and Monster Hunter, with Planetes even making use of some elements in Wilds better than most of the other monsters. But then there's Savage Omega. Oh Jesus, Jelly Jamboree. While not even remotely as bad, Savage Omega still suffers from the same problem that Extremith and Ancient Leshen had, where the developers went a bit too far in making this challenge nigh impossible. A lot of the small and prominent openings that Base Omega gave are completely gone, and some attacks overlap in a way that just feels unfair to manage, making some like the charge and missiles especially frustrating here. The DPS check is also a lot more annoying, definitely too luck-based and dependent on how much Clone Nursilla will let you attack it. Keep in mind that I've beaten Savage multiple times and have had a blast fighting him. I just think there's some jank here that is pushed a bit too far for the sake of difficulty. But god, the feeling you get when slaying Savage is like no other in this game. You fucking earned that win against Big Weld, and I easily crown Savage as the hardest boss in any of the new Monster Hunter games. It's really tricky to rank Omega given how different he is, not to mention the fact that I have a different score for Savage versus Base Omega. If you're wondering where Base Omega would be without Savage, he would be in the Masterpiece tier, while for vice versa, Savage Omega would be lower in the Great tier. I will combine the two and put them on the low end of Masterpiece. Omega Planetes is flat out phenomenal, and has left me way more excited for what the next crossover boss has to offer. As long as it's not Ancient Leshen. Please God, don't let it be Ancient Leshen. It wasn't even a debate, to be honest. With every other ranking I've done so far, there's always been some conflict on who I put in the top spot. But after fighting this guy, I seriously doubted that any other title update was going to dethrone this king. And I was proven right. It's been 16 years in the making, nearly a decade since his last appearance, all of which has been leading to this wonderful day. Indisputably the most requested monster to return in the entire series. Indisputably one of the most iconic flagships in the entire series. And what I can now say is one of the best monsters in the entire series. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Lagiacrus. It would be so easy to not say much given how universal the glaze was towards Wild's Laggy, but I really don't care. Shockrock is now one of my favorite monsters of all time, and I will make sure I properly do him justice.
Lagiacrus!
In comparison to some of the other title updates, you can tell Lagiacrus has been in the oven for years and years, meticulously crafted to ensure that every aspect was nailed to perfection. He's over-designed in many ways and it shows. Crocodilians are some of my favorite animals ever, so it's no surprise that Laggy became one of my favorite designs ever. The gorgeous baby blue scales with the orange spikes that produce electricity and the tan underside, it is the textbook example of a simple but effective flagship. The amount of detail in this model has to be seen to be believed. The multiple eyelids, including the nictitating membrane found in crocodilians, the palatal valve in his throat that prevents seawater from entering his esophagus, the large fangs that outline over his true teeth, there's just too much detail to mention. I could give an Uth-Duna level analysis on how much this creature masterfully nails the biology and ecology of aquatic reptiles. You can even see him chomp on the winged drakes and fish of the region like a mosasaur, and his rivalry with Rathalos is fantastic. It's a tale as old as time to make the King of the Skies face the Lord of the Seas. Their turf war in particular is possibly my favorite in Monster Hunter. I always appreciate fights where either monster can win depending on the circumstances. The music is a pure tour de force. I always thought the original Deserted Islands theme was decent. Not bad, but definitely didn't deserve being in the top 10 of the community poll. This Wilds cover is a different story. The violin in particular adds so much life and melancholy to this track. And I still get chills whenever the song transitions to One with Life, the main melody of Monster Hunter Tri. I never even knew about Monster Hunter as a kid. I was too busy growing up with Skylanders and Donkey Kong, but even I can't help but feel the nostalgia of this track, the emotions of this hunt. It's all simply majestic. This fight is a mechanical masterpiece, and what really sells that to me is the flow of attacks and AI. There's this tempo and rhythm to all of Laggy's moves that flow together seamlessly, all of which is fairly telegraphed and incredibly thrilling to learn. One problem that a lot of Monster Hunter bosses have is that there's a huge delay between attacks, making it incredibly easy to just run away and heal before the next move even comes out. Meanwhile, the landing leg of Shockrock is on point. If you try to heal, he will be on your ass instantly. There's just this natural fluidity to him that you can only see in the most graceful of sea creatures. His AI also plays into this. Laggy feels alive and aware in a way that makes every boss feel robotic and monotonous in comparison. What I appreciate is that instead of only using the same attack repeatedly if you're by his leg for instance, he has at least 3 attacks to hit you with no matter what position you're in, making his fight unpredictable in the best way possible. You can be so damn aggressive with this guy, constantly dodging into his side and targeting his back or head. It feels incredible. The only exception being his Thunder AoEs, but it's not a disengage that feels tedious. You can dodge backwards without getting hurt and dive right back in there within seconds. It's a battle that rewards both defensive and aggressive fighting styles. In fact, it clearly wants you to alternate between them on the fly, and I adore that so much. He then has his supercharged state, where blue electricity flows off his back, creating electric after effects that make a lot of attacks deal a deadly dose of lightning. That's on top of him following a similar style to Zinogre or Nargacuga, where he will have certain combo extensions if in its powered up state. So it never feels like BS because the glowing back indicates when the follow-ups will happen. Another similar mechanic to Zinogre is that the lightning now makes the back a prominent weak point, and dealing enough damage knocks him back into his normal mode. Then we get into the biggest surprise of the entire game. You finally reach the nest exclusive to Laggy, this gorgeous basin with waterfalls trickling into the vibrant blue below. This is where Laggy has access to some out of bounds attacks, like diving in the water only to jump back out and smack you with the Electric City hip check. But then he dives under the water, and so do you. Underwater combat is back, and I couldn't be more shocked. While definitely clunky in some spots, your movement and animations are way more fluid than I expected. Lagiacrus swims with an insane amount of grace and movement, but you have to rely on the environment and your Clutch Claw to take him down. Yeah, I say Clutch Claw because they kinda brought it back for this, being able to clutch on the monsters to deal wounds and special weapon attacks. What I enjoy is that it takes advantage of the most satisfying part of that gimmick, which was how you could take risks and aim for certain body parts as you learn to fight. Clutching onto the head when he does the tail swipe, clutching onto the body when he does the electric breath, it's all really satisfying. I know some people dislike this section or think it loses its novelty, and while it's far from perfect and the only aspect I could complain about, I still thoroughly enjoy it. Unlike the spectacle of other big monsters where you have to hide behind a rock or a shield, Shock Croc lets you be as aggressive as you want. There's always something happening to keep you engaged, and the faster you deal damage, the shorter it goes, so it never drags on unless you play especially passive. This is also another DPS check, but unlike Omega or Gog where it just insta-kills you, this one simply determines the finale of the underwater phase. Either you fail the DPS check and he unleashes a fucking cyclone whirlpool, what the actual hell, or you climb onto his head and shotgun blast him into the rubble like it's a Sekiro finisher. Oh my fucking god. First time I saw these two in game, holy shit. It truly had my jaw on the floor, and what helps is that it affects the fight when you go back above the water. If you deal the Sekiro finisher, Lagiacrus will have taken a ton of damage and be in his weaker phase, but if you get the Electric Cyclone, Lagiacrus will have much more health and be in his supercharged phase. Now, will I admit that the underwater section can lose its luster, feel a bit scripted, and suffers in replayability? Yes, I will admit that. However, what prevents me from docking down Laggy is the fact you can fight him in the Wounded Hollow. So if you simply want to fight Laggy without the underwater section or need to farm him, the option is there. Lagiacrus is an absolute love letter in every conceivable way. From the impeccable design, to the clever ecology, emotionally powerful music, brilliantly designed fight, and incredible weapons or armor, it truly deserves the acclaim it has received. This is easily the greatest monster in Monster Hunter Wilds, and has cemented himself as my second favorite monster of all time, right behind Nergigante. Monster Hunter Wilds has been quite a rocky road, but I'm so glad it's here just for us to experience monsters as spectacular as this. Well, that was a short ranking, by my standards at least. Thank you all for watching. While I didn't have as many monsters as usual to talk about, the amount I had to say on each one more than made up for it. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know what you think in the comments below. I've seen all kinds of opinions on every single title update, so I am very curious. As for what to look forward to, the channel has been going for over a year now, and we are getting close to reaching the insane milestone of 10,000 subscribers. I will say now that my 10K special will be a good old-fashioned Q&A, so keep an eye on my community tab once we reach that number. As for other upcoming projects, I will save you all a question on the Q&A and answer the biggest one that's been asked. The Monster Hunter Rise ranking. Will it be happening? When will it be out? Will it have even more terrible takes somehow? The answer to all of those is yes. It's looking to be over 3 hours long, covers over 40 monsters, and I'm expecting it to be out at some point later this year. I'm not even gonna try to set a deadline, it'll be out when it's out, alright? Looking at everything I have planned though, I can confidently say that Rise video is looking to be the best one I have ever made, and will be well worth the wait. This is Brybashton Benedicts, and lead thy life as thou seest fit.